when we transformed our little idea from Havre, Montana, and a bird hunting safari down to Yellowstone National Park, also in Montana, and we set up 35 tents in West Yellowstone on a beautiful piece of property along the river, which we'd leased. And we had no idea whether people would come. I mean, you have to remember, I know we all know now that people like to sleep in unique accommodations. We did not know this moment in time in 2012. And we had no idea if we put these tents up for the mass market to come and sleep in, whether anyone would come. And to answer your question, they came in their droves that summer. And we were open for the full summer season, Memorial Day to Labor Day. And I remember we were living in our camper. We had a camper on site. That was our home. And I remember sitting in my bed one day and I was journaling and thinking to myself, it was that Field of Dreams movie, that if you build it, they will come. Yeah. And it was very much like building a baseball field in a cornfield. It's like we put tents up in the wilderness, and it was like, will anyone come? And they came, and people loved it.
Welcome everybody to the Glamping podcast, powered by the American Glamping Association. I am your host, Ruben Martinez, and today we speak with Sarah Dusek, the founder of Under Canvas, which is a Montana-based glamping operator of 9 camps, hundreds of glamping units, and counting. Under Canvas today is a model for a product market fit and an operation that has grown into a household name in the glamping industry and beyond. When one thinks of Under Canvas, they think of well thought out, beautiful camps next to national parks. But the Under Canvas story that we see today did not start out as that large operation. It started out as a small bird hunting accommodation on family land. And like all businesses, there was a beginning. And for Sarah and her husband, the beginning was defined by struggle. As entrepreneurs, it is amazing what we can accomplish when we are really left with no other option but to succeed. This is a story that was born from disaster, a story of two entrepreneurs with a passion for nonprofit work, a story of a business that collapsed with the rest of the housing market in the 2008 Great Recession, and a story of two worlds colliding and a move to Montana that would spark an idea that would eventually turn into a proof of concept property at Yellowstone National Park that would prove to be the launching pad and would forever change the lives of these two founders. Enjoy.
Welcome everybody to the Glamping podcast powered by the American Glamping Association. I am your host, Ruben Martinez. And today we are joined by my friend, Sarah Dusek, the founder of Under Canvas and co-founder of the American Glamping Association. Sarah, welcome to the Glamping podcast, and thanks for taking the time to chat.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ruben.
So a lot to go over, and unfortunately, each episode cannot be 8 hours long, as I wish it could be. But let's just kind of dive into kind of taking us back to your childhood and the early days. Can you tell us a little bit more about where you grew up and what that was like?
Yeah, I grew up in the UK. I'm British, and I had a very boring middle-class suburban childhood. I have no idea from the childhood I had how I became a world-traveling adventurer, which is my spirit. But somehow, must have been something that happened, maybe in the tea I was drinking, who knows? But I grew up in a beautiful area of the UK called the Cotswolds in Gloucestershire a long time ago.
And growing up, was the outdoors or a version of camping or glamping part of your upbringing at all, or non-existent?
Not at all. Not at all. I was a very prim, pretty little girl. Not a major fan of the outdoors. In fact, one of the things my dad berated me for as a child was that I was not more outdoorsy. He definitely would have loved to have had boys. He had two girls. Both of us loved ballet and music and dancing and, all sorts of pretty things like that. And so, I was not very outdoorsy at all. It wasn't until probably I was in my 20s that I started to be more passionate about the outdoors. And probably really not till I met my husband. I think we'll blame my husband, who really converted me to being a passionate outdoor lover. But one of the things that happened for us, which was why we ended up in the glamping industry, was my husband is from Montana, and people in Montana, for those of you who know Montanans, love to hunt, fish, camp. They're rough and ready kind of people, and they love being in the outdoors, and they're surrounded by wilderness. And this is the man I married. And I was like, we do not go together in any which way. How is this going to work? Yeah. And at our wedding, actually, Jake made a video. I don't know if I've ever told anybody this, of his childhood and my childhood. And his childhood was he had cowboy music and Wild West music playing for his, and he grew up on a ranch and was farmer's son. And, there was a lot of mud in his. Mm-hmm. And mine was very beautiful. There was tutus, there was ballet, there was Sugar Plum Fairy music. Anyway.
And as you look back at your childhood, and as you look back at even kind of going into high school, did you take many trips as families locally around the UK, or were you guys pretty set in the area? Did you guys do much international travel growing up, or, as you said, was it really more until you were in your 20s that you really started to travel?
Yeah, not till I was in my 20s did we really travel a lot. I had a caravan, so I guess you could say I was a glamper, really at heart, not a camper for sure. But we had a little caravan when I was growing up, and so my family used to take 2 weeks holiday every year, and we would go down to the southwest of England, down to Cornwall, and we had a special spot where we would take our caravan every year. And that was our summer vacation. So that was as outdoorsy as I probably got. And it wasn't until much later in my life that I started traveling internationally. We had a few trips to France in the mix there, but certainly not a lot of international travel.
And as you look back at maybe the 12-year-old or 15-year-old self, the 15-year-old Sarah, do you think that she would believe that you would be this world traveler, the business that you're in now? And if she didn't believe so, what did that Sarah think she was going to be when she was grown up?
Yeah, great question. She definitely would she would not believe what would have happened over the course of the last 20 years, that's for sure. In fact, if you'd have told me 10 years ago where we would be 10 years on, it would have been pretty hard to wrap my brain around. And that, in some ways, is quite inspiring about the next 10 years as well, because you kind of think, well, I never could have imagined it. I never could have imagined what could happen in the course of a decade, let alone 25 years. So that's always kind of inspiring with what could happen next. And I feel like I'm already on my third life, and I'm in my 40s now. So hopefully there are many more lives yet to come and many more seasons yet to come.
And as you get through, let's say you get through high school, and walk us through what happened next. You studied at a university in the UK, and then did you go on to study law? Is that correct?
Yeah, I studied law at university in the UK. I had this crazy idea that I was going to be a lawyer. But quickly realized it wasn't as exciting as watching LA Law on TV. I fell in love with this idea of watching crazy American lawyers litigating in court, and it all seemed very exciting and very dramatic. And the British legal system is nothing like that whatsoever.
Maybe that's why they don't have many popular British law shows.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that exciting. But I met some great people while I was at university, and one of my dearest friends was from Zimbabwe. And at the end of my time of university, I was considering taking what is now called a gap year. I started to think about what I might do post-university, and one of the things I started to think about was how I give back and how might I travel at the same time. And I guess I probably always have been a little bit of a save the world kind of person. And so I put my do-gooders hat on and off I went to Africa, right post after university, and spent 2 years in Zimbabwe working for an NGO.
What were you doing there?
I did schools and youth work and AIDS education programs. So I did a lot of AIDS work in those days and taught AIDS education programs and was a trainer of trainers for AIDS education programs in my early 20s. And fell in love with Zimbabwe, fell in love with the bush, fell in love with the safari experience. And it really just left an imprint on my soul, really. And I just realized there was so much beauty in Africa and so many extraordinary people. And I loved my time. I loved my time.
Was that a stretch for you to go to Zimbabwe? Was there a moment where you almost didn't go? And I almost asked because it almost sounds like that trip to Zimbabwe was very influential of where you are today. And I'm a big believer that in life, there's often these forks in the road and often we take a left versus a right, and your life honestly can change entirely. Was that trip one of those where maybe we wouldn't be sitting here talking today? You would have gone on to be a lawyer if you hadn't taken that trip?
Yeah, definitely. I had taken a trip a previous year just during my vacations from university the summer before, and had visited a friend in South Africa. And whilst I was with that friend in South Africa, ended up completely by chance, really making a very short trip to Zimbabwe and visiting another friend who I hadn't planned on seeing. And when I was there, I realized I definitely need to come back and I need to be here, and had a very strong sense of calling as to that's where I need to be. And so started making plans when I went back to university that last year, thinking about looking for work and the possibility of doing something in Zimbabwe that next year. So very much so.
So you finished the 2 years in Zimbabwe, and we'll fast forward a little bit towards the inception of the idea of Under Campus. So can you walk us through what that was like? Was it more of a lightning bolt moment? Was it more of a slow burn? Where were you? Who were you with? Can you kind of walk us through the kind of inception of the idea of what that first property was like?
Yeah, it was really born out of disaster, actually, in that post following my time in Zimbabwe, I had worked for aid agencies for the next sort of 6 years in various different places, and had met my husband during the course of that time. We were both working overseas for NGOs. And we went back to the UK, where I'm from, got married, and started to think about going into business. We've both been very disillusioned by our nonprofit work and the struggle of trying to make change happen and impacting the world, and how do you do it? And we started to think about this idea of business being a really incredible vehicle for doing good, and that many of the problems we have in society are not solved by nonprofits. I mean, nonprofits often just band-aid a solution. not even a solution, but, we're patching a problem and trying to prop things up, but we're never really getting to the root of the problem. And so we started to think about what is a better vehicle for solving problems. And of course, business is the most amazing vehicle for solving problems, because that's the very nature of business. You take a problem, you figure out a solution to it, and you charge people to solve that problem, and therefore it's sustainable and circular economy. And so we started to think about this idea of going into business and how we could lever doing good at the same time, and using vehicle as a change driver in society, and thinking about this idea of triple bottom line, sort of impact, building an impact business. And at the time, those were not trendy terms at all. They were not things that people were really talking about, but we were just starting to think about how could we do something sustainable, that it generates an income and is doing good at the same time. And so we launched our first business in the UK at that time, shortly after we were married, which was a property development business. And we were employing young people from one of the council estates. And the council estate in the UK is like a low-income housing, government-sponsored housing. Young people to come and work, and we were training them, giving them trade skills, plumbing, plastering, painting, decorating, all this kind of stuff, and coming and working for us whilst we were renovating houses. And this was back in 2007. And then, boom, we had, much like we had this last year, a cataclysmic event happened in time, and we had the great financial crash, 2007, 2008, when the housing market just fell apart. And we were like, wow, that was bad timing to be in the property business. And so really bad timing.
You two had not only jumped into this was a business that was on its way, that was doing well. You guys had it up and running, and at that point in time, looking at the future, at that point in time, you were probably thinking, all right, we're doing this for the foreseeable future, right?
Yeah. We totally thought this is what we're going to spend the next 10 years of our lives doing. We're going to be building a property empire and employing a lot of unemployed youths, and having a training program, and doing renovations, and building a business. And we, as you said, we had started to do all of that, and we're doing really well. And then suddenly the bottom of the housing market falls out, and people are recalling mortgages and loan, and house prices dropped by like 70-80% overnight. And it was suddenly like, wow.
What was your next move? And was that move?
This is not the time to be in this space. So we literally pulled the plug on our own business overnight, laid everybody off, unfortunately, went back to the drawing board and said, we have to reposition ourselves. And at that moment in time, we said, let's go start another business. Because that's what you do in the middle of a crisis. And we moved. As I said, my husband is from a farming and ranching family in Montana. So we picked our little family up, and we moved back to the farm. We lost everything we had in the UK, and we literally picked up our suitcases with pretty much nothing, and a 6-month-old baby, and moved to Montana. Back to the family farm, and we're literally just starting to think about, how do we eke out a living for ourselves? How do we support ourselves? How do we make a living off the land? How do we create a lifestyle business? Because now we have a small family, and we need to eat.
Yeah, so walk us through that decision-making process when you're back in Montana. The idea of Under Canvas, or what Under Canvas would be, is on the verge of happening. You have a choice that you could be making, where in the middle, as we're all experiencing now, and those who are listening sometime in the future, we are in the middle of the COVID pandemic. Those are really tough decisions to make, and especially starting a new business in a version of a crisis. A lot of people would choose maybe a safer route, and maybe during that time there wasn't as many safe options, but walk us through kind of getting to that point of the idea of under canvas where that could seem like a very tough decision because it's hyper risk at a time that is not a very easy time to start a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And the smart thing to have done then would have been to get jobs, would have been to stop trying to be entrepreneurs and try and make your own path and just get sensible jobs, get employment and have a regular income coming in. That would have been the smart thing to do at that moment, and certainly what our families were recommending to us to do.
Good thing you didn't listen to your family.
Yeah, it turned out okay for them, so it's been fine. But the challenge in that moment is to be brave, I think, and true to yourself. And it's not wrong, obviously, to go get a job. We all have to eat. We all have to provide for ourselves. The challenge is trying to remain true as is humanly possible to your own sense of your own vision for your own life. And at any moment in time, we all have these choices to make as to, do I take the path that leads me away from what I really want, or who I really am, or what's really calling me? Or do I make the hard choice and take the risk and go for broke and make sacrifices and not know what you're going to have, what money you're going to have to live off, and, make and every entrepreneur you will ever talk to has these same kind of scenarios. And we all know, if you talk to enough entrepreneurs, you will all know that any successful entrepreneur also has enough failure stories in their back pocket, because the path to creating something successful also includes failure, loss, disruption, risk. Unfortunately, all those words, all those adjectives go with entrepreneurship, and they go with building something from scratch and making something happen out of nothing. And the path is never linear, and it's never easy either, which of course is why lots of people don't want to take this path, because it is very risky and it is uncertain and there's so many unknowns. But that's the exciting part about it. And you have to be a lover of risk. You have to be willing to be brave, and you have to be willing to take a shot, knowing that if you do, the likelihood of living your dream and going after the things that call you and after the things that you love are much more likely to happen if you do.
So you're at this point in Montana where you've chosen as a family, we're going to take on this risk. We're going to go for broke. We're going to make, we're not going to do a sensible thing. We're going to do the high risk thing at a moment in time where the world is, the economy is in shambles. So walk us through the vision of that first property. So you guys are saying, we're doing this, we're going to go for broke, we're going to do our own business. Was it clear what that vision was at that point in time? Were you saying could be a version of property number one for Under Canvas plus maybe 3 or 4 of these other ideas that we might get into? Or what did that look like?
Yeah, we started with a very small idea, and we weren't thinking big, and we weren't thinking scale, and we weren't thinking huge amounts of revenue. We were literally thinking passion. What do we have? What do we have that we could utilize? What could we lever to our own advantage in this moment? And what do we care about? And coming out of the property development industry, we were thinking, we had a piece of land. My in-laws have a large ranch, which is very beautiful. So we had something. It wasn't ours, but there was the possibility of levering it and using it. And we looked at that and thought, gosh, this is beautiful. How do we create an opportunity for other people to come and experience it? And that's where mine and Jake's sort of stories sort of really came together, really, because he was hunting, fishing, camping, roughing it. I was beautiful, comfortable, luxury, beautiful things coming together. And we were like, how? And then we had property development experience.
It's almost the story of the Montana mud and the UK ballet kind of colliding and joining forces.
Coming together, exactly. And so really we looked and said, how do we create a beautiful experience that's comfortable and easy and accessible and wonderful, and marry that with the wilds of Montana, and at the same time create development in a way that is not harmful for the earth and not destructive? And how do we build but not destroy what's already here? And so we married lots of pieces of our lives together. And then there's the African safari experience. It was like, oh, we could being in the wilds of Montana is very much like being could we recreate the safari experience from Africa? We married together. Literally, we were married, but we married together lots of our own experiences, of our journeys, of our personalities, of our expertise, and brought them together in a very small idea. And the very small idea was, let's create a small luxury camp on my husband's family's farm and see if anyone will come.
And at that point, were you running full? So you have this inception of the idea, and now there's this marrying of these two worlds in a way. You say, great, we've got some resources. We haven't done this before, but we've got experience doing other businesses. Were you running at 1 million miles an hour to get that idea up and running? Or was it more of a, hey, we'll kind of chip away at it and we're still looking at some other ideas? What was that like? What was the cadence at that point in time?
Well, I had a 6-month-old baby. So I was struggling with, I'm a new mom and we also need to eat. So we need to hurry this along a little bit because we need to earn some money. And if we don't earn some money, there's going to be a real problem. And so it was a bit of both, actually. We've got an idea, we're trying to make it happen, but we started really small. And I think that's maybe a useful piece of the puzzle. Often we find it hard to make something happen because you don't have all the money to make it happen. You've got this big grand vision for a huge resort or this idea of this huge glamping thing that you could create, but you don't have all the money for it. We didn't have any money for what we had the vision for, and we begged, borrowed, and we didn't steal any money, but it was almost like that from friends and family. And we had a lot of friends come and work for us for free for a few months because they wanted to experience being in Montana. Work, volunteer / there's no work there. There was no money changing hands. And internship. So internship, there we go. Unpaid internships, yes. And we this idea of making something happen. Traction is everything. And I'm an investor today. And so when you're starting a business, it's this idea of how do I get traction? And how do I prove my concept? How do I get a minimum viable product to market? These are all the terminologies, right, of getting investors to invest in you. It's like, so starting small is absolutely no bad thing. Proving a concept is a really, really powerful idea, even if you've got a much grander, a much bigger vision, which we certainly didn't have. But it's this idea of you can make big things happen, and starting small and chipping away at actually making something happen is a huge inroad to fulfilling something bigger.
So you get to a point where this is becoming real. You're starting to make plans. It's not executed yet. The property isn't up and running, but you're saying we're going to do a version of this. We've got the pieces. We've got our friends coming out to help us in this unpaid internship for a non-existent college credits, but they're coming in to help out. What was the first development phase like for you, knowing that you hadn't started a camp like this before? Was it smooth? Was there hurdle after hurdle? Did it go quicker than you thought, slower than you thought? Kind of walk us through the point after you say, great, we're going to do this. We've got all the pieces. Now we got to start, putting the shovel in the dirt. What was the property number one, first phase, what was that development phase like?
Yeah, it was very intense. We gave ourselves very unrealistic timelines. We were trying to sort of build this thing and get it open so guests could come and stay. And so we were up against the clock from the get-go. And if you've ever built anything before, you will always know that construction always runs long. There are always delays when you build anything, just because you're contending with weather and suppliers and laborers, and there are so many variables. But that was certainly our experience in that first season when we're trying to get something open. And of course, you need to build something so that you've got photos, so that you can then show people what it's going to look like, so that they will pay you to come and stay there. So it's a really challenging time. I remember we had the luck and the blessing of being able to host our first guests, which was crazy. And when we first opened our first under canvas, which was actually called Sage Safaris, was a small. We put 4 tents up in a little lodge, and it was a hunting boutique safari for bird hunters, and that was the original idea. And we had a film crew come out for a bird hunting TV show as our first guests. So talk about baptism by fire. We barely had the building finished, barely had anything functional, barely had hot water running. And the first people who come in to stay with us are film crew. But it was an amazing gift. I mean, it was super challenging, but it was an amazing gift because it gave us an opportunity to showcase the property immediately, which bore dividends for the year to come. So it was crazy.
So you have the 4 units up and running, and even before the film crew books. So let's say you've completed it. The vision was to have 4 units and a lodge. And now you said, okay, we've completed. We've completed the development phase of it. And I'm sure that was a huge relief from being able to get that done. As you then turn around to market it, and I know that the film crew was the first group to come in, did it take a while for other nights to be booked? Were you on schedule where you had enough of the first season ahead of you, or were you kind of at the tail end of the season? Was that first season with the 4 units a success?
Yeah, they became our only guests that fall, and I don't think we had any other guests that fall. But we just about managed to get it up, get some video footage, get some photos done, to be able to take it all down again before the snow came that year in Montana, to be able to put it up again the next year. So, it was. I think one of the challenging things about opening a new property is the time lag between being able to market something effectively and guests arrive. And that's really hard. I mean, it's easier nowadays when you can Photoshop images and you can have, potentially design plans that you've created but it's not quite the same as having real footage and real reviews and real people, actually seeing the real product. It's tough.
For that second season then, was it still a bird hunting lodge? Yes. Is it still Sage? And at what point did you ever transition to a different marketing sphere?
Yeah. Well, I think what happened that second year for us, we started to have guests coming in. We started to service clients, which was fabulous. But I think we realized, gosh, we don't have a viable economic product here. We had built something, but hadn't realized, gosh, we're not really going to be able to generate enough revenue and enough income from the weeks that we're able to serve clients that will work as a sustainable business. I mean, it would be a nice side hustle if we had other jobs and other things going on and we took a month or 6 weeks out to do this every year. But we were trying to make this our full-time real gig. And so what that did was that realization was a bit of a light bulb moment, because we realized, the idea as it is doesn't quite work well enough, which caused us to go back to the drawing boards and go, what we've got is great, but it's not all there is. There must be something more here. So we went back to the drawing board and started to think about how we could drive revenue, how we could lever what we had again, how could we evolve it a little bit further. So it was sort of like taking the small idea that we had to start with and trying to enlarge the idea and trying to think a bit beyond where we had got to with our small thinking.
And what was the realization specifically at that point that you know, was the determining factor that it wasn't sustainable? Was it number of units? Was it who you were marketing to? Was it the brand itself? Like what exactly wasn't working in your mind?
The number of units, 1, the length of season, 2, and 3, the location.
Seasonality?
And seasonality, yeah. So sort of the length of season with the seasonality was a big problem, really, because we weren't able to be open for long enough. And also we realized that the hard part about what we were trying to do was we were trying to convince people to come into the middle of nowhere in Montana and have a great experience. And bird hunters would come for bird hunting season, but that season is like 2 months long and that was not sustainable. So could we then convince other people to come for the summer season? Well, no, not really, because there's not a lot else to do out there. And so we had a mishmash of, we've got something, but we don't have something. You know, you're on the verge of this challenging time where you've got a great idea, you've got a great product, but the fit is not perfect. And so it needs another iteration. It needs another sort of go around the block to try and get better product market fit. And so we went back to the drawing board and said, well, people love the tents. They don't love our location. What could we do about that? So then we started to think about maybe we need to take the tents to where the people are already going. And so take the concept idea, but it needs to be in a different place. And then we realized if we could be in a different place, we could have more units, which would be more economically viable. And ta-da!
But at that point, was there ever a moment where you two had said, listen, we made a good run. It's just not working. We should probably step away. This was a good experiment, but it's just not going to work. Was that a constant conversation in a battle, or was that it surfaced a few times and then as you went to the drawing board, you realized, hey, if we just pivot, we now have something?
I think what forced us to pivot, and I think this is the challenge between effectively navigating failure, right? Is this we desperately needed something to work. So there's tenacity there that says, we've got to make this work because I've got nothing to go back to in the UK. We've got no income. We have small children and we don't want to go just get jobs. We fundamentally believe, in the idea of business and that business can be a powerful tool for good, but we have to keep going back to the drawing board. So I think in some ways having nothing made us desperate. And made us hungry and made us determined and meant that we had to stay in the game long enough to find product market fit. And I think one of the challenges for all entrepreneurs is staying in the game long enough. I can't remember who I've heard say it, but it's the sense that the ones who were successful were not because they had brilliant ideas or, they were any better than the next person or were more talented or more capable. They just stayed in the game longer. And, we very much had that issue. And it was, we could have given up 1,000 times. And even when Under Canvas was launched and really became Under Canvas, we totally still could have given up and walked away and went, this is way too hard. This is never going to work. So the amount of iteration, the amount of tweaking, the amount of pivoting is phenomenal that happens in any startup. And now I'm a full-time investor now and investing in startups in Africa. And one of the things I'm often saying is the faster you can fail, the faster you can, the faster you can keep pivoting, and the faster you can keep making iterations and adjustments and tweaks and changes, the faster you will get to the successful core of a business that could be very, very successful. And the trouble is, for most of us, that really hurts our egos. It really, it's so very, very painful. And it's so very, very challenging that it's easier and less intense to just walk away than it is to push through the pain barrier and come through the other side. And so grit, there is no underestimating the power of grit, that is for sure.
No, I like that a lot. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I've always said as well that I love that the Japanese proverb, to fall down 4 times, get up 5. And that's very true in starting any type of business and learning how to take a hit. And as you look back from that time, right, before you're about to pivot to this new property, where the people are and really up the unit count, and even during that first property as well, that sense of keep on going, keep on moving, take the hits. Did that motivation mostly come from that sense of desperation and, hey, we have to make this work? Or more from, if we make this work, there's really going to be a long-term sustainable plan here, if you know what I mean? Was there a mixture of both? We're in it, because a lot of times with any operator, with any business, specifically in the glamping space, it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And really, you're just looking at the 3 feet in front of your face and just trying to get things done. So were you more in that mode of, we have to make this work because, man, we're just in it too deep at this point in time and we don't want to pivot? Or could you always see the light at the end of the tunnel?
I was very bad at seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. If we were having this conversation with my husband, he was much more optimistic and much more believing that we would find something that would be amazing, that we would come out the other side. And he had a much more, and it's weird because if you ask anyone who knows us very well, you'd say I'm the more optimistic one. But actually, his ability, I think what it is the ability to see things yet that don't exist. And he's a good designer. And so he's very good at imagining, going into a building, for example, or looking at a piece of land and imagining what it could look like. I am terrible at that. And so the task to imagine a successful business or, what it could look like, is very hard for a lot of us. And thinking about, imagining building a crazy dream is hard. But certainly for me, I know I was just focused on, we need to survive. This is survival. I need to survive for my children. I need to survive that we keep a roof over our heads and we keep food on the table. And both of those things were very challenging. And I remember we literally were living on food stamps and we had no income whatsoever. And I remember applying for aid at one point for Montana's child healthcare program for children to have free healthcare. And we didn't qualify because my in-laws had given us a small car. And I was beside myself with, we've got no income. We have one asset, which is a couple of $1,000 value car, and we don't qualify. I was like, how poor do you have to be here to get assistance? So we were very desperate, and it was beyond tough, and I don't recommend anyone live like that.
That's an amazing story to fast forward to where Under Canvas is today, and to really truly understand and digest the humble beginnings of how it started and how it could have really not gotten any further if it wasn't for the grit and the situation that you were in. It was almost the environment really helped you kind of move move that forward. At what point, knowing where you were at the beginning and knowing how tough and how much of an uphill battle that was there a vivid moment where it hit you that this worked, that this was it, that this was really going to be something? Was it a specific moment? Was it after a season? Was it a specific conversation that you could really basically look back and say all of that was worth it? Everything moving forward is going to be, sure, not perfect and there'll still be challenges, but it's going to be more green pastures than anything. Was there a specific moment where you knew this was going to work or that it was working?
Yes, I remember when we transformed our little idea from Havre, Montana, and a bird hunting safari down to Yellowstone National Park, also in Montana. And we set up 35 tents in West Yellowstone on a beautiful piece of property along the river, which we'd leased. And we had no idea whether people would come. I mean, you have to remember, I know we all know now that people like to sleep in unique accommodations. We did not know this moment in time in 2012. And we had no idea if we put these tents up for the mass market to come and sleep in, whether anyone would come. And to answer your question, they came in their droves that summer. And we were open for the full summer season, Memorial Day to Labor Day. And I remember we were living in our camper. We had a camper on site. That was our home. And I remember sitting in my bed one day and I was journaling and thinking to myself, it was that Field of Dreams movie, that if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
And it was very much like building a baseball field in a cornfield. It's like we put tents up in the wilderness, and it was like, will anyone come? And they came, and people loved it, and they loved their experience. And when I saw that people loved our idea, they were willing to pay money, their hard-earned dollars, to come and stay with us in a very unprofessional setting. I mean, it was a show. When people were putting their trust and their vacations in our hands, I realized we are onto something. We have discovered something that people want. And that actually is a very magical feeling of when you design something and you create something and you make something happen and people want it and they will pay you money for it. It's an amazing privilege and it was an amazing moment for us. I mean, that summer was probably one of the hardest summers of my entire life. How my husband and I did not get divorced after that summer was, we look at each other often now and go, we did that. If we can do that, we can get through anything. Because we had 35 tents up, which could sleep, could sleep 4 people in each tent. So we could have over 100 people on the site, and we had 5 members of staff. And I had 2 children who were 3 and 9 months old at that point in time. And I was one of those 5. So it was brutal. It was ridiculously brutal. But I do remember thinking, this is it. We've found this elusive product market fit, which I was not using the terms at that moment in time, but we are onto something. We have discovered something that people want, and this is amazing.
Your story is a fabulous one, and the Under Canvas story is just something that is incredible to hear and exciting to go back to the beginning. So thank you very much for sharing it with us. And before we go, one last question for you, and one that we receive all the time, but curious, don't worry, no right or wrong answers here, but what do you feel is going to be if you're going to look into the crystal ball, what does the future of glamping hold in your perspective? I know that the world is changing every minute, as it seems, but we get that question a lot of I know it's sometimes just not tangible and often hard to predict, but from somebody who has built such an incredible organization from the ground up and to where it is today, what do you see in that crystal ball?
I think the future is so bright for the glamping industry. And here we are a decade on from the last major global crisis in our, the global pandemic that we find ourselves in, and glamping is thriving through this crisis like nobody's business. And the future is outdoors. The future for travel is outdoors. It is in nature. It is in preserving beautiful wild. It is in preserving our land, creating accessibility for all to it. It's building sustainably. It's being environmental, being conscious of preserving and protecting our planet. It is caring for our earth in ways we've not cared for before. It's managing our resources in ways we've not managed before. It's developing in ways that are sustainable and friendly for the planet. It is the opportunities for the glamping industry. And this was one of the reasons I was so passionate with you to set up the American Glamping Association, was for the glamping community to lead the world in sustainable development, in ecotourism and responsible travel. And there is such an opportunity, and we are seeing in our midst this huge pivot globally happen in people wanting to travel sustainably, be more locally, and see in the outdoors. And that becomes an enormous responsibility for us to be able to educate, pioneer, help people be responsible, sustainable, and enjoy our wild places and our outdoors, because it's the future. And if we don't take care of the planet, then it's gone and we're not getting it back. And so the future is very bright. The future for leading, the future for revolutionizing the hospitality industry forever is in this moment. And hotels are empty, glamping locations are full. And every hospitality company on the planet will be wanting to transition to a more experiential, more outdoors, more sustainable way of doing business if they're going to survive post-pandemic. And the glamping industry is here to lead that revolution.
Couldn't agree more. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. It's great, as always, to catch up and talk with you. Glad to hear everything is going well with you and the family. Thanks for all you do for the glamping industry and for taking the time to head down memory lane with me today. And looking forward to catching up with you soon.
Sounds good.
Again, and as always, thanks for joining us today. For more information about the American Glamping Association, please visit americanglampingassociation.net, or feel free to reach out to info@americanglampingassociation.net. Until next time.